Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My last few videos have been financial videos, and I know some of you are interested in that, some aren't. I promised something else. So I decided to make a video today about something that I have thought about for a long time, and more and more recently have had reason to think about it more, so I thought I'd go ahead and make this video. Now, this is a tough video for me to make because it comes at great personal risk to me. And this is my coming out video. I'm straight, so it's not that kind of coming out. But there are a lot of similarities. And I want you guys to kind of think about my background and take that into consideration, because maybe the background that I'm from, it's less acceptable to be an atheist than maybe it is other places where you guys are from. So some people will think this is no big deal. Where I'm come from, it's a huge deal. Like, you might, like, they would probably prefer you be an ISIS than be an atheist. So, you know, at least they're religious, right? Okay. So, this is brought up because of a couple things. Back in April, it's August now, I had a weird experience. I had gone back to my home state, and I was working for the volunteer organization that I work for. I was actually sitting in a restaurant waiting for my food. It was late at night, and this guy came over to me, and he's like, "Can I pray with you?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not praying, but I guess." Anyway, it was really weird. He prayed with me, and I don't really know. I felt like it was kind of I was near a university, so I feel like maybe it was kind of like a Christian group there, or a Bible group or something. They said, "Hey, let's go out, find people who look pathetic, and pray with them and make them feel really uncomfortable." I don't really know. I really have no clue. But I mean, I was nice to him. It wasn't a bad thing he was doing. Maybe the intentions behind it weren't the greatest, but I was like, "Okay, sure, you want to pray with me? Pray for me? Okay, that's fine." So, anyway, I was kind of weirded out by that experience. And then I thought about it afterward, and I'm like, do I look like I need Jesus? I don't know. I didn't know. I was like, should I feel good about this, that this guy approached me and wanted to do something nice for me, or should I feel offended that he saw something in me that made him think that I needed help? I don't know. I really don't. And then probably, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 months after that, I had one of my super fans on my channel sent me a message, and I know you're probably going to watch this, and this is nothing against you personally. It's just another thing that led me to kind of making this announcement, was that you know, he talked to me back and forth about my channel and his plans in life and stuff, and then he's like, "Has anyone ever talked to you about Jesus?" And I never responded after that. I mean, you know, we had a good conversation. Why did you have to put that in it? First of all, to answer his question, yes, I don't live on Mars. Yes, I've heard of Jesus. Yes, somebody's talked to me about that. But I don't feel that you really should be finding random people on YouTube and acting like you're a friend or a fan, and then trying to rope him into that. And maybe that's not what he was doing, or maybe it was and he doesn't feel like that's what he was doing, but that's how it felt to me. And so I was really taken aback, and ever since then I kind of decided that I was going to make this video. So, I want to give you guys a little bit of background about my upbringing, because you might think, oh, this guy's an atheist, like he doesn't know anything about Jesus, he doesn't know about the church. And I can guarantee you that I probably can outquote the Bible to you. I probably have been a lot more involved in organized religion than most people who are Christians. I, in fact, grew up in an area where I don't know literally one single person who is not a Christian. It's the kind of, we're not in the Bible Belt, but we're very close, and it's the kind of place that every corner has at least one church on it, sometimes 4 churches. It's just, not that I know anyone who's not Christian, but if there were to be somebody who is not Christian, I don't know how you could even function in the community. Because not only would you be shunned, but you would be, like, you wouldn't have a social network, you wouldn't have a support structure, even, whether you need help paying your bills or you're hungry or homeless, all of those things are done through churches. So you literally could not exist in the place that I'm from. And that's not to mention the discrimination that you would face. And that's one of the big things that has been a stumbling block to me being open about my atheism. While some of my friends know and things like that, I never say anything to anybody about it. Except for maybe like one friend who's known for years. And I don't talk about it because it's like going to the Middle East as a woman, or, coming, like, I don't know, going to Nazi Germany as a Jew. Like, it's not something that is recognizable, but if they find out by the way you behave or something that you slip up and say, I mean, that's the end of your life. I'm telling you, these people, these Christians where I'm from, are so intolerant. I mean, they fight amongst themselves about being Baptist or Methodist. They don't consider Catholics Christians. Like, they're so caught up in fighting among denominations of Christianity that if you are not Christian, it's like this. Here are the different denominations of Christianity. Further out from that are, do this differently so you can see it on cam, different denominations of Christianity. Then there's this is different religions, so maybe you're a Muslim or a Jew. And then clear out here, way where you can't see it off screen, is not believing in anything. And to them, that's much worse. So here's my struggle, and here's my story. I grew up in a small church of about 12 people on a good Sunday. There's probably seating for 50, but even on Easter Sunday, we'd never have that many. Very small town with 3 or 4 churches in it, and I was the only young person. So there wasn't like a youth group or anything like that. Now that was the church that I grew up in, and that was a Presbyterian church. This church, it was a church that my great-grandparents had gone to, my grandparents, my parents, and me. Not my dad, he didn't go there, but he was married there. It would have gone back further than my great-grandparents had they not been the ones that moved to that area. So I did grow up in a very religious household, and I grew up in a very conservative home environment. And my earliest memories of religion really would be probably preschool, because where I went to preschool was also at a Presbyterian church, a bigger one in a city, but I did 2 years of preschool before I went to kindergarten. And I went to public kindergarten through all of school. I was also in the Boy Scouts, which a lot of people don't know this, but in order to participate in Boy Scouts, I don't know if it's still true, but at that time, they did not allow atheists in Boy Scouts. So that's another reason, at least as this story developed, that I could not be open and honest about my religious views. But that wasn't until probably late high school that those views started forming. I went to that church in the city for a while, probably until about first grade or so when my parents divorced, maybe a little bit after that. And then I went to that church in the country that I feel like I grew up in. I went to that church probably through about junior year of high school, so about 16, 17 years old. Actually, a little bit earlier than that for me because I graduated at 17. But I did that, and it was strange in a way. My mom says that while it's a Presbyterian church, they don't prescribe to a lot of the Presbyterian teachings. Okay, so then why be a Presbyterian church? But I do see what she said. I see what she's saying, because when we would go to church, it was really straightforward. You would go in, you had a sermon, you had a teaching from the Bible. It was called a New Testament reading, I think. I think there was an Old Testament reading. And then sometimes we had communion. There was there was an offering. I remember the doxology. There were like 3 or 4 songs usually that we would sing, and that was it. There was never a point where they really taught the doctrines behind their beliefs. So it was actually related to Boy Scouts when I started looking into what our church actually believed. We had a pastor from that little church who transferred into a city that was fairly nearby, and I kept in contact with her. I want to say I was in around 6th grade at that time. And I should say, as a kid, I was super religious. It was partially the environment I grew up in, and partially because this was before the internet, and there literally was nothing to do. So, in a way, the church was sort of the social outlet, because there wasn't the internet and because I lived in the middle of nowhere. So, going to church on Sunday was the thing you looked forward to. And I feel like I was rewarded, sort of, not in a physical way, but in a validation sort of way, every time I took steps to be more and more Christian. It was always encouraged to read the Bible, or to go to church, or if there were for a while, for like 1 year, the 4 churches combined to have a youth group. It was always to go to their meetings. But I felt like, and this is in terms of how I would describe it today, I felt like the more and more that I got involved outside of that little church, and started seeing like the 4 different Christian denominations that we went together, and I learned their teachings and stuff as well, is I started to kind of become radicalized. And I mean that in the same way that, like, Muslims are radicalized. I think it was, in fact, the exact same thing. Now, no one ever encouraged me to be a suicide bomber or anything like that, but they did encourage you to martyr yourself for God. And that's really scary thinking about it. So what I ended up doing was I ended up getting more and more into it. This was back in the day when WWJD, What Would Jesus Do, was a huge thing. I read like every book on that. I loved going to Family Christian Bookstore, looking through all their stuff. I wanted all the t-shirts, all the WWJD bracelets. I lived my life like that. And then there was this other thing that came out. It was another bracelet thing. It was Frog, and it stood for Fully Rely on God. And I mean, I was like a super Christian. Like, I was so into this. And So anyway, being this like super Christian and being more and more into this, of course I read the Bible more and more. And that's one reason that I know it so well. And part of it is that when so I was talking to this pastor that I had grown up with her being the pastor of my church, and I was in Scouts, which is a Christian organization, and I wanted to get this religion award, and I can't remember what it's called, but there are these medals that you get to put on your uniform, and it's whatever denomination you are. They even have ones for like being a Sikh or being Jewish. It's as long as you believe in a God, or like a spiritual entity, they have one of these badges for you. And you're supposed to work with your pastor, and you work through that. Well, I started working with my pastor, and it was basically like going to seminary. You had to learn all of the doctrine part behind your religion. Well, none of that had ever been discussed in my church, and I don't think there was ever any interest in discussing it. These people were completely happy to just blindly follow what it was sort of vaguely a faith, but they didn't really understand because they didn't even know what their church stood for. They were just happy to do that. But I had some questions, and they may or may not have coincided with trying to get this award. I don't remember exactly when it happened, but it was sort of a turning point. I still consider myself a super Christian. I didn't really consider myself that at the time, but looking back, I seriously was. And I was into like DC Talk and Jars of Clay and all the Christian music and stuff too. So the next thing that happened was I started asking questions. And one in particular that I remember, and this is probably the one that set me off. It's like anytime I had a question, something I'd read in the Bible, something we do in church, I'd try to ask. And remember, this is before the internet. I can't just Google, what does this mean? Internet didn't exist. I could ask my mom. That was about the extent to it. And she was one of the ones that was happy to just blindly follow. I remember one of the things that maybe like once or twice a month in church we would recite was something called the Nicene Creed. So we had the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, and I think it's the Nicene Creed I'm talking about, but maybe it's the Apostles' Creed. I don't remember for sure, but it's I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, something forgiver of sins or something like that. And then anyway, in the end of that, it says the Holy, and it's still saying I believe in whatever, the Holy Catholic Church, and then a couple other things. I'm thinking, we're Presbyterian. We're really different from Catholics in a lot of ways. We're a Protestant denomination. Why would we recite something that says I believe in the Holy Catholic Church? And it was capitalized as Catholic, you know. So I was like, that's really weird. And so I started asking. And that is really what set people off. Really, I started asking this question of other people in the church. I asked the pastor, I asked my parents and my grandparents, and everyone completely brushed off my question, and they sort of acted uncomfortable and offended. They honestly acted like I was the spawn of Satan, and I kind of got almost pushed out of the church because I started asking two questions, but the one about the creed was the big one. It turns out the answer to that question about the creed was incredibly simple. The definition of the word Catholic means universal. That's it. It's just saying, I believe in, like, the governmental body of the church. That's it. You could have just told me that. But I don't think those people knew themselves, because they were just blindly led too. And it never occurred to them to ask a question that a 12-year-old or 10-year-old would come up with. I meant no disrespect. I just cannot fathom the way that these people handled me asking questions. And I was super involved in church. I was an acolyte. I was in choir. I did handbells, and I just can't understand this. And so what happened was, the other question that I was asking was not just about this creed, but I also started asking about, why do I have to dress up to go to church? Like, I was expected, and this is really old school, but I was expected to, like, wear clothes to school, and then those were the nice clothes, and then I went home and I was expected to change into less nice clothes that I could wear around the house. That to me sounds ridiculous, but that's what I was expected to do. But then on Sunday, you had to wear your absolute very best. People wore suits, they wore dresses. I don't remember what I wore, but I know my grandmother and my mom, to some extent, were always on me because they said that I wasn't dressed up enough for church. And my thing was, God doesn't care. Or at least if you believe in the Christian God the way our church taught it, why would God care what you wear to church? I mean, yeah, you probably shouldn't go to church naked, but, he would care that you're there to worship Him. He wouldn't care, that's the opposite of what God's about. He doesn't want you to come to church to show off your clothes to Him. He doesn't care about that. And I started, and especially because of how defensive people got about it, I really started seeing that people weren't going to church to worship God. People were going to church to wear fancy clothes to show off to the other people who went to church there. And I thought, as a Christian, that was incredibly wrong. And it really turned me off to this church. Well, asking about that, and asking about the creed, I basically, like I said, I pretty much got pushed out of this church. I was refused membership, even though I was like fourth generation to go there. And I was persona non grata. They didn't physically throw me out of the church, but they stopped telling me about events. I even taught Bible study in Sunday school. They stopped telling me about stuff. I basically was completely alienated. I was stared at the entire time I was there. So I started checking out other churches. And with other churches, I started checking out other denominations. The first I went to was a Disciples of Christ church. It was the church my dad had grown up in. And he considers himself a Christian, he just doesn't attend services. And we went there once, and it was okay. We went once, that was it. Then we started going to this church that a couple kids I went to school went to, and some guy that my dad knew somehow took us into this church. It ended up being a United Methodist church. And they described themselves as the holy roller church of the community. They were very, I guess you'd say, evangelical. But let me back up a little bit. Keep in mind this little Presbyterian church I went to, they taught you Bible stories. They taught you I memorized the Lord's Prayer, things like that. But they didn't, there's like another level of learning about Christianity that they didn't teach about. And I learned that in high school. Because in high school, first of all, we had a priest as our biology professor. And so we didn't learn about evolution at all. In fact, and I'm going to make a video someday about my teachers and some of the ridiculous stuff that they taught us. They taught us about spontaneous generation. And so, while I was in high school, I had a Catholic priest who was wearing his whole thing with a little white collar and everything, teaching biology, did not teach evolution, didn't actually teach creationism either, but he taught us about spontaneous generation. While I'm going to a school that blatantly defied the state statute, had an oil painting of Jesus and the Ten Commandments in the school cafeteria, had prayer in the morning, forced you to say the pledge, and the only group, like clubs in your high school, well, you had to go to a club, and the only club that existed was FCS, Fellowship of Christian Students. Seriously. I graduated in 2003. This is like something from like 1940. Anyway, I also, being a Presbyterian, was one of the very few people in my high school that was not Catholic. So we had fish on Fridays during Lent. I celebrated Lent for the longest time, even though it's not a Presbyterian thing. I just picked it up from school. But yeah, we prayed every day in class. It was, looking back on it, I'm like, what the fuck? How are these teachers employed? Anyway, so that all happened around this time too. And the next thing that happened was they started bringing into school some pastors. Again, what kind of public school has guest speakers who are pastors that talk to you about religion? Well, our school district did. And some of these pastors were completely off the rocker. And so what I kind of consider the new Christianity, which is the anti-science Christianity, that was brought into my knowledge, my awareness at this time. We had a pastor come in, and he saved us. Now, I'd never heard of being saved before. I don't think that's the thing Presbyterians do, and I know Catholics don't do it. So we were saved in class, and then there was, and then he started teaching us some really crazy stuff, like that the King James Version was the only version that could be used. All the other ones were garbage and written by the devil. Then there was like, oh, yeah, okay. He's the first one I ever heard, because I never really thought about it, but started telling us that, like, there were dinosaurs in Noah's Ark. And I honestly thought that was, like, the coolest shit ever. I was like, holy crap. Like, I never even thought about dinosaurs and what happened to them and things like that. I'm like, they were on the Ark? That is amazing. It was kind of the really extreme, like, batshit crazy stuff that you hear about in fundamental Christianity, that this person was telling us. And of course, I just absorbed it like a sponge. I loved it, man. Like, I was being radicalized, and it was just like this. So anyway, all that stuff happened around the high school years, and that whole thing about only being able to believe the King James Version got me to where I bought a King James Version of the Bible, and I've read the Bible twice all the way through, and individual chapters a lot more than that, and I will say that's probably more than 99% of any Christian has ever done. Because let's face it, the Bible, if you have read the Bible, it is boring. And I mean, if for no other reason, that's why people don't read it. But I don't know any Christian who has read the Bible. And I'm sure everybody in the comments is going to say they read it. Honestly, I don't believe you. You might have, but so many Christians have lied to me about it, and I just can't believe you. But I've read it, and that was sort of the answer at that little white church. It was... Phone's ringing. That was sort of the answer at that little white church is, if you have a question, you read the Bible. And I'm like, okay, but like what chapter? Where do I go for the answer? It's just like, read the Bible. It's in there. So it's like, I have a question of like, well, what happens, like Presbyterians believe in predestination. They believe that there's like maybe 100,000 people or some predetermined number that from the beginning of time were destined to go to heaven. And no matter how pious a life you live, if you weren't part of that number, you're going to go to hell anyway. And I'm like, I don't believe that. I believe that if you live a good life, that you'll go to heaven. But anyway, so I was reading the King James Version of the Bible, and I think that's reading the Bible, ironically, is actually kind of what directly led to my atheism. Because the more that I read the Bible, the more that I was... So, you know how it has all those like little notations at the bottom, and it's like, well, this we think means this, but in the Greek it could mean this or this. And it was just page after page after page of this, and I was like, the whole argument of this fundamental Christian thing is that the newer versions of the Bible post King James, so in the last 500 years, all of those are wrong. Because they've been translated, there's translation errors, they've been edited to conform to political philosophies. Yet, if you read the King James Version of the Bible, and especially if you look into the history of how the King James Bible was written, you see that that is exactly the same problem that the King James Version has. And if you look further back, and you look at the Council of Nicaea, you see when what we call the Bible now was originally formulated, that was the same problem then. They threw away the doctrines they didn't like. They had to agree on who Jesus was and what he was. So it was just, the more that I looked into, the more that I took seriously what these teachers and these priests and pastors said, the more I started to doubt things, and I started to look into them for myself, and I started to see that there were so many holes in any story. And then the other thing I started questioning was, like, for example, for Presbyterians, I thought, why do Presbyterians believe in predestination? It doesn't say that anywhere in the Bible. And how did they come to this number of 100,000, or some people say 300,000? Out of the billions and billions and billions of people that have lived throughout human history, that's such a small number. Who made up that number? It's not in the Bible. So if you're saying that the Bible is the literal Word of God, which is what fundamental Christianity says, then where are you getting this? And then when you read, and you there's only one section, it's when Jesus is in the desert and he's been being tested by the devil. Our whole image of the devil doesn't exist in the Bible. And, you can see from my other videos, I'm really interested in history, and I just somehow transitioned from reading the Bible to understand the questions that I was having about my Christianity and my faith, to the Bible leading me to kind of doubt everything that was in the Bible and realize that it was historically inaccurate and mistranslated and politicized, and at the same time these people are claiming that that's the literal Word of God, absolutely it's been passed down perfectly by man throughout all this time. And now obviously that's not true, because there's so many different ways to interpret it, and there's so many different translations. And you're telling me, in spite of the fact that I can give you 2,000 different translations of the Bible, that's exactly what God said. Every version of that is exactly what God said. That's literally impossible. And so the more I questioned it, the more people got defensive, the more that they were unwilling to answer any questions. And I wasn't doing this from a point of like, oh, hey, you're wrong. No, it was, I don't understand this. Please help me understand this. As a Christian, I want to know how this fits into our faith. And all I discovered is that these people played these mental gymnastics with themselves to be able to believe these things even though they contradict everything else that this person just said. And so I got to a point where I didn't believe anymore, and it was after reading the Bible. I got to a point where I didn't believe. But I was absolutely terrified to even admit that to myself. So at this time, I'm still on the praise team. I'm still active in church. What ended up happening, why I stopped attending church, is I started working on Sundays because other people wanted to go to church, and I was like, okay, well, I'll work those days then. And that was kind of the end of it. It really didn't have anything to do with me turning into an atheist. But I got to this problem after reading the Bible and questioning it. And keep in mind, I still don't have access to the internet at this point. So it's not like I can just Google this stuff and have an answer instantly. What would take an hour to figure out today took like 3 years to figure out. So what I ended up doing was I ended up figuring out that I needed to continue studying the Bible, continuing to ask questions, and I just got to this point where I was terrified and I didn't move forward with any progress for a very long time, because I came to that point where I knew I didn't believe, but I couldn't admit that to myself, because I thought as soon as I admitted it, I would go to hell. I would go to hell, and I was terrified of hell. I'd been conditioned my whole life to be terrified of hell. And it took me literally years, I say about 3 years probably, until I felt comfortable with how I felt, that I could admit it to myself. And I didn't tell anybody else for years after that. But I finally just one day realized, well, I don't believe in any of this stuff. And I'm like, and I know that most of what we believe as Christians does not come from the Bible. It was made up after that. Almost all the doctrines of the Catholic Church and of the Presbyterian Church, they're not in the Bible or even based on the Bible. They're on people interpreting the Bible and talking about how they think Jesus was as a person and what he wanted, and their interpretations of it afterward. But if we're going by the Bible, then our religions are completely off. finally, once I was able to admit it to myself that I didn't believe, I got to a point where I believed in history. I'm a historian, amateur as it may be, but historian nonetheless, and I really fully trusted history. And if somebody could present, and I desperately looked, I was like, historical evidence of Jesus, etc., and I was like desperately looking to prove that Jesus was real with actual tangible evidence. And of course, the Bible was written 300, maybe 150 years, whatever, after, I'm talking about the Gospels, were written after Jesus had died, but I kept looking, and the more I found, it was just like, there's no evidence of this person existing. There was no evidence that the census ever took place. There was no evidence of a Pontius Pilate, which they did, in fact, find his name inscribed on a tablet since that point. But it was just like, there literally is no evidence of this amazing person ever existing. And that doesn't 100% mean that he didn't exist, but you have to look at it as, if 100% of the evidence that is available does not show any evidence of this person, then you have to be extremely skeptical that this person ever existed. And if this person never existed, then that means that all of this is fake. All of it. And I mean, it does take you years to process that, because your entire life, our entire culture is based on religion and Christianity and Jesus, and it's so mind-blowing. And then you question yourself, and you're like, am I crazy? Especially where I'm from, I don't know a single person who's not a Christian. I didn't tell these people for years. I kind of came out to my mom a few years ago, and it was really bad the way she reacted to it. We were on the phone, and I can't remember, and I had accepted this in myself for so long that, I just didn't even think it was a thing. And I said something to my mom, and well, I don't believe in that stuff. And she's like, I was like, I don't believe in God. And she was really mad at me. And she's like, well, why not? And at the time I was like, Mom, I'm 27 years old. I can believe what I want. And how dare you demand that I believe in something because you believe in it? And she shut up after that, and she's never asked about it again. But seriously, I know in the area that I went to college, in the area that I used to live in, where I'm from, I would be denied services at businesses, restaurants. They would find reasons to deny me access to school or anything. I mean, it would be like in Puritan times when you were an adulterer and you had to have the scarlet letter pinned on you, and then if you were caught without it, they would brand the capital A in your forehead. That's how being an atheist feels. The same level of discrimination, and that's how being an atheist feels to me today. Now I live in a big city, I can be more open about it, but only with people I'm close to. The general public, I'm sure, would still act the same way. And I don't tell people very often. I try to avoid discussions of religion or anything like that. Now, that doesn't mean that I completely hate Christianity or Christians. I do... Now, let me back up a little bit. I should say, up to this point, I considered myself agnostic. The reason that I switched from agnostic to atheist after a few years was because agnosticism basically says, I don't know and you don't either. And that was the point to which I went. After years more of studying everything, from a scientific perspective, I'm 99.99% certain that God doesn't exist. Jesus didn't exist. The things in the Bible aren't true, even from a historical perspective. That's where I'm at, and it took a long time to bridge that gap. Agnostics and atheists are generally lumped together, but they're two completely separate things. And I think that for the most part, I've bridged that gap to atheism. I'm still a little agnostic. I think my Facebook still lists me as agnostic. But, yeah. Now, with that being the case, I still live in a very Christian society. There's often things that I go to that there's prayer, and I bow my head. I don't say anything. I don't participate in it, but I bow my head. I'll even say amen at the end. I actually prefer to date Christians. The last girl that I dated was extremely into her religion, and we were together for 3 years. Because I do see that there are values that, attributes that a lot of Christian girls have that I find valuable. And that doesn't mean that atheist girls don't have that. But I do feel like, I can find a nice Christian girl, and a lot of them have the attributes that I'm looking for. And I will say, to her credit, this last girl that I dated, we never thought about it and never talked about it. She was very accepting, which I have actually faced a lot of discrimination from Christians in my area who have found out that I'm agnostic or atheist. But I will give this girl credit. She said that she's a super Christian, but that it's not her place to judge anyone, and she never tried to convert me, and she never tried to even discuss it with me. And she was completely comfortable with me being what I am, and so props to her. Now, I said I've faced discrimination. A lot of that has been in dating, because in dating, you're on a date or you start seeing somebody, and in my area, everyone just assumes you're a Christian. Always. And this girl in particular, we had actually worked together, and she looked me up a few years after that on Facebook, and we started talking, but she went on a couple of dates with me, and everything was Christian. She somehow had got a list of Christian-owned businesses in the area and would only patronize them. So anytime we went out to eat, we had to go to those restaurants. She would, her entire world was Christian. I mean, when she went to college online because, the liberal conspiracy in academia, and then when she went to grad school, she went to Liberty University, which is a right-wing Christian hellhole, and I forget what the second college she went to, but it was the same thing, online and Christian, and she was a member of this really conservative Christian youth group kind of thing, even though she's 25 now. She was still a member of that. And those are the type of girls that want to immediately get married, immediately get pregnant. And that's the only thing that really bothers me about dating Christians is I'm a dude, but I've always wanted to get married. I'm cool with that. Even if we get married in a church, I'm okay with that too. I just don't want kids. And it seems like there's an extremely tight, high correlation with being a Christian and having kids. I can't think I've ever met a Christian who said that they didn't want kids. And that bothers me, because I don't want them. But otherwise, I'm cool with dating Christians, and I hope that, if I date a Christian girl in the future, that the kid thing is something we can work out. Anyway, I'm sure I'm leaving a lot out of this, and I know a lot of these sentences haven't made sense. It's kind of a tough thing for me to talk about. I figure I'm going to get a lot of backlash on this video and some real nasty comments, but I just wanted to finally put this out there that I am an atheist. I don't believe God exists, and I don't think in a historical context that Jesus ever existed. I believe that most of the things in the Bible are false. And on top of that, I don't believe that you need to have a religion to be a good person. I think that there just is right and wrong. And of course there is a gray area, but I think that most people know right and wrong. And you learn that from your society that you grow up in, whether that be a church or whether it just be people in general. If you need to have the Bible to tell you the things on the Ten Commandments to follow, to not steal, lie, cheat, like bang your neighbor's wife, like whatever it is, if you need to have a book that tells you not to do that, then you're seriously messed up. That's why Pope Francis said that all Christians Catholics should aspire to be like atheists, because we do good because we want to, not because we feel that there's a reward in the end for us. And the other thing is, I don't believe there's anything after this life. I don't want to waste this opportunity that I have here to try to score something better down the road. I don't believe that exists, but by believing that that exists, you kind of don't take... You don't appreciate the time that you have here and what you're doing. And you don't enjoy it to its fullest. So I think that that's something else about being religious that really bothers me. So I'm not here to completely slam religion or Christianity. There's a lot more I could say about it, but that's not why I'm making this video. I just wanted to be open and honest with you guys and tell you that this is what happened to me, this is how I feel. Because even in my YouTube videos, everyone just assumes I'm a Christian. I'm not. It's okay if you are. I don't hate you. We could probably be friends. I'm asking you not to hate me either. And with that said, I think that hopefully I can show you a non-scary atheist. I will admit there are atheists that get in the way and are kind of assholes about it, but I don't really ever talk about it, and I think that's the way probably the majority of atheists are. I think a lot of atheists are afraid to admit that they're atheists because of society and because of how they would be treated. And I think that sounds really familiar with being gay and how you'd be treated by society, so you instead fake being straight your entire life. And in that sense, I feel like I really understand more the way that people who are in the LGBTQ community have to deal with that. So, anyway, I hope that I won't lose all my subscribers from this, but I am prepared to lose some, because I know that this video is going to be very controversial, and that I'll get a lot of nasty comments. But I do hope that this is down to earth enough that somebody out there who's in the same situation as me or a similar one can at least feel more comfortable believing what they do, even if you don't go public with it. And I hope that you are able to at least admit who you are and what you believe, while being respectful to people who believe the opposite. And it really is freeing to finally admit to the world this thing that you've thought of for so long and you feel has made you different. That you can finally tell people who you really are, even in the face of that fear of discrimination, and know that there will be a few people out there who accept you for it and don't think any less of you for it, just because you're different. And for the Christians out there, I would think that as Christians that is the Christian thing to do.